it made me realise what I was missing out on. It made me realise that there's more to life than work, and that having me around is actually really important to my family, to my wife and my kids, and they actually quite like me being there. So it was a revelation, I guess.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Fatigue. It's something that's become front and centre for so many in the industry this year. After working entire careers, putting every ounce of energy into their vocation, many in the hospitality sector have been given the chance to rest and take stock of the toll of years of working long hours on their feet. With a moment to breathe, what impact will that have on those carving out careers in the industry? Iain Todd is the executive chef of Saffire Freycinet. Iain, how are you going?
I'm going well. Huck, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for joining us. You've been involved in many venues in Tasmania and been known for working too many hours as well. What sort of impact did the lockdown have on you when it first happened?
And when it first happened, it was pretty scary, really. Obviously, I think everyone was in the same boat. No one really knew what was going to happen, whether we'd be all getting sick and dying, and whether we'd have jobs to go back to, whether there'd be dole payments for us, or how we were going to put food on the table at home. So kind of once that all resolved itself, and my company was pretty good with communication and all that, so that was pretty short-lived, really. But once we actually got locked down and they closed the business kind of indefinitely, I actually had a break for the first time in many years, more than just a few days. I got to be there for my son's first birthday. I got to sleep more than a few hours a night. I got to ride my bike and reconnect with my family, I guess, and something that I'd never really done before. I got pneumonia almost straight away from my body, I guess, not being used to not just running on empty the whole time. So it was a bit of a double-edged sword, but I think for the most part it was really good for me.
Well, let's go back a bit. You mentioned that you got pneumonia after working such long hours for many years. What sort of toll has working in the industry taken on you, and how did it feel in that time when your body was sort of in shock?
I don't really remember how my body felt having that break. It kind of, I felt sore, and I felt like I couldn't rest. The first day I was in lockdown, I was up at 5 o'clock in the morning and reorganised the pantry at home and cleaned the oven, and it really took a few days to kind of wind down. And within probably a week, I ended up in hospital with pneumonia, which is the third time I've had it. Usually it's when I'm working so hard that I can't rest, but this time it was because I did rest. So that was a bit of a weird one as well. But I think the industry's had a real toll on me. I guess I've been doing it for 20 odd years. I'm of the old school where work is, it's the centre of my life. I've got kids and a wife and all that now, and trying to balance my life around that. And I think the COVID thing really made me realise what I was missing out on. But it's cost me relationships. It's cost me my health, my mental health. It's been a pretty wild ride, really.
You spent some time in hospital during this pandemic with pneumonia. What was it like, the hospital experience, given the pandemic and COVID? Was it a very different hospital experience for you?
It was a bit frightening because obviously being prone to a respiratory issue kind of made me realise that I might be a bit more prone to the COVID virus than other people my age might be. But I was pretty, really well looked after actually. Everyone was taking the best possible precautions, and I felt pretty safe in the end. It wasn't much of an issue at all.
You're one of the most influential chefs in Tasmania, and at the moment you're at Saffire Freycinet. What's things like now at the moment in Tasmania? Does it feel relatively back to normal?
It does. We actually closed down for about 8 weeks completely, and then we reopened for just the Friday, Saturday night for Tasmanian guests only. We actually ended up being full almost every week with just our Tasmanian guests, with a special Tassie only rate. So people who never got to come here got to come and stay. It's pretty well out of reach for the average person, at $2,500 a night. So most people is kind of on the bucket list, but they don't really realistically get to come. So people did get to come and experience Saffire, and that was really nice, and to show it off to the Tasmanian people who've really supported us over the years. But as of Thursday this week, we're back to full swing, 7 days, 7 nights. We're getting people from, obviously not internationals, but from New South Wales and Victoria, which make up about 97% of our Australian market. And we're full. We're almost fully booked until Easter now. So we've kind of gone from 0 to 100 in a couple of days. And I've realised that I need to make a pretty significant change to the way that we do things. Well, I do things because I'm back to working undesirable hours for the next few weeks. Just waiting on some new staff to arrive. We're a bit busier what we thought we would be, a bit sooner than what we thought we would be. So, I mean, it's a good problem to have, but again, it's harking back to that kind of COVID shutdown when I realised what I was missing out on at home. It's all come kind of flooding back a bit the last couple of days.
What's some of the things that you feel that you could put in place to achieve that kind of work-life balance that is missing for so many in the industry?
That is a very good question. I think learning to trust people and trust my staff is kind of the main one, I guess. I've got a team here that I've had for a few years now. Incredible chefs, very passionate from all over the world, and enjoy living in a remote location and enjoy working at the level that we do. But I have pretty significant issues in just letting people do their jobs and not trying to get involved in absolutely every part of every service of every day, 7 days, 24/7. So I think I need to work on that myself, and learning people's strengths and where I need to be putting them, what sections and what hours they want to be working, and really organise the team properly. So that's going to be a big focus for me, sort of post-Christmas, to get the business really working for me in the kitchen, I guess.
You mentioned that you're a bit of an old school chef in many ways, with rolling your sleeves up and just getting into it and making work your whole life. How different are kitchens from 20 years ago?
I think very different, and in a really good way. Like I was bullied, I was punched and kicked, and it was a pretty horrible environment when I first started. When nowadays you just don't hear about that so much. We pay everyone for all their hours. We treat people with respect and listen to them. I think it's a vastly different industry to what it was a few years ago. But I just don't think I can't seem to snap myself out of that, just working from morning till night. It's got to be a pretty significant change for me mentally. I think there's the key to it.
Where did it all start for you? Can you take us back to those early days, 20 years or so ago, when you started a career in hospitality? What led you to that?
I've always worked in food. My first ever job was working at an oyster farm, just being a farmhand. That was in the 90s. And then I worked in a big commercial butchery, going there after school and scrub down the bandsaw and use the pressure washer on the floors and to basically clean up after a day in the butchery. Then I finished school and I was going to go to university and study architecture, but ended up getting a job washing dishes in a new business, a new restaurant that had opened. And before too long I was working, preparing food, and then moved to Melbourne to do my apprenticeship, and here we are 20-something years later still doing it. I think like most people, just kind of fell into it, and it got under my skin, and now I can't get rid of it.
Well, you worked at places like Phoenix in Melbourne and Hobart's Henry Jones, and you made a real name for yourself as a young chef and owner with Piccadilly. Can you tell us about those days?
So Piccadilly days, I was 24, and I was working with a guy at Henry Jones when we were pretty close and had a very similar outlook on food and restaurants and what we thought was good and what we didn't, and decided to open a little restaurant, which is about 35, 40 seats. And we try to do something that there really wasn't in Hobart at the time, which was kind of high-end fine dining. And we did pretty well. He and his partner had a baby and sort of got out of it, which left me there. So I did that for 5 years, and then the opportunity to move and open another place came up in the city. So we moved to the city and opened a big spot, which was about 100 seats, and kind of it was a real roller coaster of styles. And we started out just kind of doing a tapacy, kind of a small plates and share table, and that kind of evolved into doing like a feed me option, and then most people ended up doing that feed me option. So then we sort of moved into set menus, and all this while I was making a real kind of pool of Tassie producers and growers and farmers. So we ended up doing a set menu which changed every day using only products from the island, and that menu would be cooked and served, and then the next day we would write it all again and start from scratch. So it was I dug my own grave there in terms of the hours I was working, and battling depression and all that sort of stuff at the same time. But yeah, we got a bit of critical acclaim, which was pretty nice. So did that for 5 years. And then my wife was pregnant, and we'd had a terrible winter, and it just seemed the right time to close it. So we closed it in 2016, I think it was. And now I work for a big company with a couple of hotels, and I live in the middle of nowhere on the East Coast, and life's pretty good.
Ethos, that larger restaurant in the centre of Hobart, really put a focus on local producers, and it really challenged you as a chef with what you were doing there with the daily changing menu. What drives you as a chef to do that sort of thing? Does it start with produce?
In that case, it certainly did. We would write a list of what we had in the pantry and in the fridge in the morning, and write the menu solely around what we had on the property. So the meat and everything was all from Tassie. So obviously in winter we have a pretty desperate situation with fruit and veg. There's not much no fruit at all, I guess, and not much in terms of interesting fruit and vegetables. So the winter, I guess, was the challenging time to be trying to do as many different things with carrots and kale as possible. And then in summer, there's this bounty of stuff in summer. There's all the fruit and all the veg you can imagine. So summer was pretty easy. We just kind of cut things up and put them on the plate. But yeah, doing that for a few years was it was a good challenge, and it taught me a lot about what I like to cook and the way I like things to be, and letting flavors speak for themselves, and sourcing these ingredients that you can just kind of let do their thing. And then I started here at Saffire, which is just so very different because we're a hotel, we're ultra luxury. We have people coming to stay who are the richest, most powerful people in the world, and travel like this all the time. And we have people who have saved up for years to come for one night for their 50th anniversary. And they want to be blown away by the food, and the richest, most powerful people on the planet want to be blown away by the food. So it was a very steep learning curve for me to start cooking what people wanted to eat and not what I wanted to cook, which you come from restaurants. People come into that restaurant to experience that particular experience. People come to Saffire for all sorts of reasons, and the food is part of that experience. So they might come for the environment. We've got the national park and everything here. They might come for the architecture. They might come because it's got an amazing reputation. They might come because it's the only ultra-luxury property in Tasmania, and they're staying for breakfast, lunch and dinner and snacks and activities and all that the whole time they're with us. So they're not going, there's nowhere else to go in Coles Bay. So we do a different tasting menu every night here as well, but it's a very different kind of motivation for me in terms of what I'm putting on the plate, if that makes sense.
Can you take us through what you are doing there? Do you have a dish or two that you could take us through to give an example of kind of that luxurious sort of offering that you guys are doing there?
Ooh, that's a good question. I guess we try and champion those perceived luxury ingredients, like we're using the best Wagyu beef that we can source in Tassie from Robins Island. So we're getting this 9-score eye fillet, which is absolutely exceptional. We're putting it with some mushrooms from a tiny little backyard producer in Hobart called Little Island Mushrooms. We're picking some herbs from down on the beach, and from our little herb garden here on the property. We're making an incredible sauce that takes days to make, and putting all that together and telling the story, which I think is probably the key to it, is that communication as to why we've selected the ingredients, why they're on the plate, and how special they are. So I guess the Tasmanian experience is really key to what makes Saffire what it is and how special it is. People come from a long, long way away. We're 2.5 hours, 3 hours from the nearest airport. So people do actually travel to get away and to become immersed in Tasmania. So the stories, I guess, are the key. But then we have to have the lobster, we have to have caviar, we have to have the best fish, the best beef, the best lamb, the most delicious vegetables, the best chocolate, all that sort of stuff to kind of back that up. But the dishes that strike a chord with people, I think, are the ones that have the story to go with.
Take me back to when you were working on the oyster farm back all those years ago. Did you get any sort of insight into how important grape producers were back then?
I don't think I really did. It's something that's always been kind of taken for granted in my family, I guess. We had a little vegetable garden as kids, and I loved potting peas and growing things, little potatoes and okra and that sort of thing as a kid. So it always been kind of part of my childhood, I guess, having those things there. And whenever there was a special occasion in the family, so a birthday or someone did well at a test or whatever, we would go out and we'd have a great meal somewhere. So that side of quality restaurant has always been really tied to good times, I guess, and success, and or even the opposite of success. We would have a commiseration dinner. So I guess having those the focus on produce and getting things right and having nice things there has always been kind of a part of that. I don't think I put that together at the oyster farm though, because it's pretty messy, hard work. And I was doing things like bashing the wild oysters off the rails with a hammer, and wasn't the most wasn't the nicest job I've ever had. But I guess it kind of it was food related, and I felt comfortable in that kind of environment, I suppose.
Have there been some key moments during your career that have inspired you or set you on a new path to become the chef you are?
Probably lots. I think the first and foremost would be that first restaurant I worked in back in 1999 was owned by Robin Black and Catherine Wakefield, who were real kind of trailblazers in the Tasmanian restaurant industry at the time. They had a cafe called Kumquat, which was the first kind of real high quality cafe in the city, I suppose. And they kind of inspired me, and they harnessed me, and they saw something in me, the passion for food, and gave me those opportunities early on, which I guess sowed the seed for me to push what I have in the industry and to stay in the industry for so long. And they gave me responsibility when they probably shouldn't have, and they just let me go with it, and encouraged me to move to Melbourne and help me as best they could. So I think that is the most pivotal point in my career, is like really the first kind of hospitality gig I ever had just set me on this path to do what I have done, I suppose.
At the top of the show, you sort of openly talked about the toll that being in the industry has taken on you, and also having moments of suffering from depression. For those looking to get a start and own their own business, what sort of advice would you have to them about trying to look after yourself and mental health in an industry such as hospitality?
Well, I think making it a priority is absolutely the key to that. For me, I've never really made my mental health a priority. It's always been very task oriented, which I guess most people in the kitchen are. You've got your list of jobs to do, and you've got your service to do, and that is your whole focus. But when you're running a business, you've got so many other pressures. I guess mainly the financial ones, to try and get your business to be successful. And that, I guess that's another thing to take you away from focusing on yourself. So my advice would be to build that into your business plan. You've got to have your mental health in the right space, or you'll get burnt out. You'll start resenting your business. You'll lose your relationships. You'll be a horrible boss, however it manifests itself. But I don't think any of those are particularly good. So I think build that mental health plan into your business plan, and you'll be off at least on the right foot with a bit of a focus on it. But for me, it's always been kind of an afterthought, and I have the ability to switch it off when I'm at work. But when I'm outside of work, it's been a big issue for me for a lot of years, and lots of treatment and lots of tablets and lots of late nights, I guess.
You've been a major part of Tasmanian culinary scene for the last 20 years. How much have you seen it change in that time?
Incredible amount. It's a very, very different town to what it was 20 years ago. I think I couldn't have achieved what I have and done what I've done in the industry had I not left the island and gone to Melbourne and learned from some great chefs there. And travelled and done all that. There just wasn't the depth of, I guess, skill, and the dining public wasn't ready for great restaurants. The producers weren't here. So there just wasn't, and there weren't enough great spots in Tassie, like one or two at best. But in the last few years, I think people are just, things like Instagram's just opening people's eyes to what else is out there, and people are choosing to move to Tassie, like industry people are choosing to move to Tassie instead of moving away. They're actually coming here, and they're bringing that passion and their skills and their networks here, and it's really enlivened the industry. There are more great restaurants than you can poke a stick at, and more talented people than ever. And I think people are dining out more and expecting more, and it's pushing the industry from both ends. So it's a vastly different place in the last 20 years. I think Tasmania is, you're proud to tell people you're from Tasmania now, whereas 20 years ago people would kind of look at you like, where's your second head? Where I think Tasmania is a paradise.
You mentioned a little earlier that having that time off with the initial lockdown, you got to attend your son's first birthday and spend a lot more time with your family. Has that experience changed you?
I think it really has. It made me realise what I was missing out on. So I wasn't there for my daughter's first birthday, and those kind of big events can leave a bit of a mark. So it made me realise that there's more to life than work, and that having me around is actually really important to my family, to my wife and my kids, and they actually quite like me being there. So that was it was a revelation, I guess, to actually be there and be forced to be there and have nowhere else to be. It was awesome, and now being back at work in that full-time capacity and back to working the hours that I was working before, it's given me a lot to think about, that's for sure.
Well, you mentioned you are trying to work out how to obtain that life-work balance because you've realised what you're missing out on. But what are you loving at the moment with the restaurant busy again and sort of moving on beyond COVID? What are you enjoying?
I'm enjoying the Australian guests being here. We're seeing a lot of people who probably travel like this quite a bit, but would be always going overseas to do it. And now that they're not, they're actually coming and they're travelling in Australia, they're travelling in Tasmania and doing things that they probably haven't done before. So that's been pretty awesome, I think. Because, I mean, there's a lot of great places in the world and lovely places to go, but seeing people actually travel and enjoy things close to home has been pretty special, and we can show off what we do here normally to an international market this time of year. We'd be probably 70-80% international guests, but at the moment it's all Australian, so I think that's pretty cool actually, and that they'll go back to Sydney and or Melbourne or Adelaide or wherever they're from and talk to their friends, and hopefully that actually boosts the Australian market even more into the future as a bit more of a long-term thing, because who knows when international travel is going to start again. So I think that's been pretty awesome, and we're getting to show off what we do better than anyone else. It's pretty cool, I think.
The circumstances of this year have given you some sort of revelation about the way that you operate. How are you going to look back at this period of time?
I think I'll look back at it pretty fondly. I think it's been good for me in a lot of ways. A bit of stress financially and all that, but far outweighed by the actual good stuff that I got to spend with my family, and got to heal my body and my mind a bit. So I think I'll look back on 2020 as more of a positive than a negative. Obviously things can get worse again, but I feel like we're in a particularly good spot in Tassie where we have this natural border around us, and it doesn't feel dangerous. Like I'm not worried about getting sick at all because we can manage it so easily with this natural border. So it's more a cultural issue, and yeah, I'm pretty positive about it. I think a lot of good change will come out of COVID for the industry, and it'll be stronger for it on the other side. We're all kind of working to our strengths a bit more and focusing a bit more, and not just going through the motions. So I think it'd be a good thing down the track.
Well, Iain, I've had the pleasure of enjoying your hospitality on numerous occasions, and I hope it happens again because you're a bloody legend, mate. We've loved having you on Deep in the Weeds. Please keep in touch and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks, mate. Thanks for having me.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we share the stories of Australia's hospo community, suppliers and producers in search of hope during this pandemic. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast, or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.